quid pro bono, and skin in the game. Those two concepts right there will help you much more in your life than all the therapies and all the fluff that you hear all the time online by people, by influencers and all that. Quid pro bono, Cícero used to say that, and it's for the benefit of whom? And it's meant in the economic sense. When you are offered something, you have to see if there is a economic motive behind it. Therapy is a billion-dollar industry, especially in North America. And surprisingly, when you actually see the data, they've actually produced more divorces than normal if you would have left people on their own devices. So that should tell you something. So then Nassim Taleb on Fooled by Randomness and Skin in the Game, he talks about how you have to be paying attention to that type of signals, right? That if you are pushing for something and that creates an economic benefit for you, but it also avoids any responsibility on your side, then you should be very wary of that. Again, therapy lately has been the creator of much more problems than anything else, and people don't want to have the difficult conversation about that. The amount of divorces that therapy and marriage counseling and all these things have created, it's just absurd. And I'll tell you something that a lot of people, especially when you go to therapy, they don't tell you, right? Nietzsche used to say they muddy the waters in order to make it seem deep. And it's a very good visual analogy of what therapy and therapists does or do, is that they create all these convoluted language and all these crazy interpretations and very complex interpretation to try to force their views, right? And their explanations. And it's like Alfred Adler used to say, who was surprisingly a psychologist, but he was not in the Jungian sense or in the Freudian sense. He was against psychotherapy pretty much. And because sometimes things are very simple. Occam's razors, right? Things are very simple and we just like to make it sound complex, especially when you're trying to use the conjunction fallacy. You create more things on your existing argument to try to make it seem deep. So I'll tell you something that is very interesting. They'll tell you about attachment styles and trauma bonding and narcissistic personality disorder and all these things. But sometimes, most times, things are very, very simple. And when you use visual analogies, you can then see, not illustrations, but analogies, you can see much more clearly the things that make sense, right? There is a thing, right, that John Maxwell says, you cannot give that which you do not have. And it sounds obvious, but it's not. And you see that a lot in interpersonal relationships, especially in personal relationships, that you do not give that which you cannot give that which you do not have. So when you have two people in a relationship, so one gets labeled as too intense, too much. You are overbearing. You are, like Pepe Le Pew, the the uh, the skunk in the cartoon, right? You're too much. You're too intense. And then the other person is labeled as distant and not too much, not intense, avoidant, right? But if you think about it, both people are speaking from their perspective, and both are equally correct and equally incorrect. And I'll give you. So, for example, when you have that person that is like the Soviet Union, when you have a person that is like the Soviet Union, and they don't have food, they don't have nothing to give, right? So you get these cues, and all they can give you is a loaf of bread. Sorry about that, it was a bee. So all they can give you is a loaf of bread, right? So then that's what they've had all their life. They have been in a scarcity mindset, and all they can give you is a piece of bread. Now, when they give you a piece of bread, right, and you're in a relationship, it's understandable. Like, you go and say, this is not enough, right? And they're like, what do you mean? Like, I'm giving you everything that I have. But the problem is that most people fail to convey, because nobody likes to speak clearly. So indeed, they're giving you everything that they have. You might think it's not enough. But now, if you would know, if only you would know that the only thing that they have to give is a loaf of bread, then you would realize, and you would cherish that. You would not have an issue with that, because I know that all you have is a piece of bread, and you're willing to give me that. And then, on the other hand, you have the other person that usually it's labeled as too much, too intense, too overbearing, too much. And it's because they have an overabundance of love, right? They want to give you everything that they can't. And their love is limitless, in the sense that because they have a abundance mindset, they'll even try to find more things to give you, right? So then the other person starts receiving all these showers of love, and they get drowned in it, because they have not been accustomed to receiving that much. So then they label you as too intense, too much. Now, that's where communication should work, right? Some people, it's not that. So you have two ways of seeing these things. Some people can say, hey, you know what? It's just that I've only been able to give a piece of bread, but also to receive a piece of bread. I cannot eat that much. I've never been able to eat that much. And not nutritional things. So when you start giving them like really good, abundant meals, they cannot eat that much. So they should go and tell you, hey, I cannot eat that much. Now, sometimes they can eat that much, and you sense that. You're like, yeah, but you can't eat that much. But then you also have to realize that most people, let's say a woman, it's used to receiving lots of food, lavish, flamboyant, picturesque, flashy food, right? So lots of cakes, lots of desserts, lots of flashy, colorful things. Like if you would just transpose, it would be like this husband that has a lot of money or boyfriend, and give them all this lavish style, but they're not happy in reality, right? Some. If that's what you want, then that's okay. But if you just want more in life, you end up realizing that you're not necessarily happy with that. And that's where the disconnect is because they've been accustomed to receiving all this excessive food but excess of non-nutritional food is just desserts and flashy food, right? But then you come and give them a 5-egg omelette in the morning, and you give them steak and eggs at lunch, and for dinner, Venezuelan arepas. Well, they're not used to that, so they can eat that much, but they're not used to that type of nutritional food that it's very fulfilling and very joyful. So they cannot process that. Can they? Of course they can, right? Can you create a storage? Yes. Can you put it on the fridge? Yes. So you can find ways to increase the capacity that you have to receive things. And you can also convey that you need to adapt to that. So as you can see, and then the person that is too much has to understand that, or has to be told that, hey, I can only give you a piece of bread. This is all I have. Now, logic says that one has to sacrifice certain things and try to adapt to that person. But the other one should try to sacrifice too, because at the end, love is about sacrifice, right? You have to give away certain things to get other things. And then the other person should try to find a way to, okay, how can I increase my production so I don't only give you just bread? Because that is the famous old-time excuse of this, well, this is who I am, or this is how I am, right? And I hope that that's an analogy that you can realize that is very applicable visually to how things are. So a lot of these type of relationships end up in the marriage counseling or therapy, but that's not what they tell you. Start digging into your past and thinking of all these other things, and life is very simple. Just going through the courage to be disliked, which is preceding the courage to be happy. It's a Japanese author trying to explain the philosophy of Alfred Adler. I really like this part that says, so I am unable to change because I myself keep repeatedly making the decision not to change. I don't have enough courage to choose a new lifestyle. In other words, I do not have the courage to be happy. And that's why I am unhappy. So it's very telling, because we sometimes like to say that it's all the conditions and this and that, but everything worthwhile is uphill. And you will never see somebody that, let's say, goes to the Everest and knows that it's a perilous endeavor complain about that, because the only way to get to the top of the Everest is by going through that perilous journey. Here's another part of this Adler philosophy that I like. No matter what has occurred in your life up to this point, it should have no bearing at all on how you live from now on. That you, living in the here and now, are the one who determines your own life, because the past does not exist. So a lot of people get hung up on that concept. What do you mean the past doesn't exist? That's why Adler had this fundamental digress from Freud about trauma and all these things, because sure, he's saying that the past does not exist from a quantum or logical perspective. But also what you have to understand from that point is that if you keep repeating the exact same mistakes, let's say that you have a blind spot and people point it out to you and you keep repeating those mistakes, then, well, the past exists, but in the sense of, well, you're choosing to continue doing the exact same thing. So you do not want to change. And John Maxwell, the way that he puts it, I love it. He says, most people are accustomed to old problems than new solutions. Some people just would rather continue sabotaging their life, and just because they know their problems, they know the way that they fight, they know that the way that they struggle with others, so they would rather keep doing that than moving to the uncertainty of having to do a different way of being, right? Here's another one that don't be evasive. Being the way I am with all these shortcomings is, for you, a precious virtue. In other words, something that's to your benefit. Admitting is a good attitude, but don't forget it's basically impossible to not get hurt in your relationships with other people. When you enter interpersonal relationships, it is inevitable that to a greater or lesser extent that you will get hurt, or you will hurt someone too. Adler says to get rid of one's problem, all one can do is live in the universe all alone, but one cannot do such thing. So that's a different way of what Maxwell says. People are more accustomed to old problems than new solutions. So you don't need therapy. You don't need to go and pay $240 for many months or years to somebody that is not able to actually help you, does not want to help you really, because it's a business for them, when you just have to realize that it's up to you. Let's see. There's one more that I have marked here that I really like. Yeah, here it is. The real issue is how one confronts that reality. It's simply that it's scary to take even one step forward. Also, that you don't want to make realistic efforts. You don't want to change so much that you'd be willing to sacrifice the pleasures you enjoy now, for instance, the time you spend playing or engage in hobbies. In other words, you're not equipped with the courage to change your life. It's easier with things just as they are now, even if you have some complaints or limitations. So that's why he says that the past does not exist and that things are a choice. For example, if I start going to the gym or exercising or playing baseball or going into karate, jiu-jitsu, taekwondo, whatever, right? If you've never done it before, so you were not a person that did that. But now if you're actively looking forward for that, you are willing to change the way you are in order to gain that situation. But then it is very easy because there's not enough personal cost there. That's why we sabotage our relationships at home, at work, and with interpersonal relationships, is because those ones have a higher cost. So the next time that you find yourself sabotaging and having struggles, it's like, it's not that, for example, that, oh, it's just that I just want peace, I'm tired of fighting, this and that. Well, if you keep fighting for the same issue over and over again, it's because it has not been fixed. It has not, you have not done the willingness to seek to understand the other person and see how you can fix it. But then, it's like Adler would say, because at the end, your ego of saving face, of not willing to admit that, because you might think that you're being an asshole or, you're being a horrible person. That's not the case. But some people believe that from themselves, because every thief judges by its own condition. So anyway, bottom line, to wrap things up, be always wary, quid pro bono, skin in the game, and see life like that. You're not too much, and if you are the person that thinks that the other person is too much, maybe you should realize that nobody's judging you in reality, and that you also have to convey your messages better. Because if you don't, then it's a choice, and you are choosing that. Anyways, good reflection for everyone.